Excellent. Well, welcome today. Welcome to the Ask an Ace series. This is the AIA Virginia series where we learn about careers in architecture, construction, and engineering industry. My name is Paul Battaglia. I'm the EVP of AIA Virginia. It's my honor to serve as the moderator today. If you're with us live, you certainly can raise your hand with some questions or drop something into the chat. And if you're joining us on the recorded version, then welcome to you too. And we're glad you're here. And no matter how or when you found us, we invite you to have fun and to enjoy the event. So today, we're talking about landscape architecture. And today we're going to be talking with Jill Nault, P-L-A-A-I-A, which means if you speak the code, that Jill Nault is both an architect and a landscape architect. Jill studied at UVA and received her Bachelor of Science in Architecture, her Master of Architecture, and her Master of Landscape Architecture, all at UVA. Jill Nault is a principal and a landscape architect at Water Street Studio. That's a multidisciplinary environmental design firm with offices both in Charlottesville and Richmond, Virginia. I'm also happy to say that Jill is also a dear friend and even a former colleague. And I've long admired Jill's talent and passion and professionalism, and enjoyed and perhaps even envied at times her development and achievements. And so I'm really looking forward to talking with Jill again today. So hello, Jill. Welcome and thank you for being with us.
Thank you for that introduction, Paul. Good to see you.
Likewise.
And welcome to everyone who's on the call who we can't see. I wish I could see some faces and, be able to see some expressions or some moving hands or something like that, but we'll continue on.
Very good. Well, Jill, I thought maybe we'd start with a couple of fundamental questions, right? So landscape architects, what is this landscape architect? What does a landscape architect do? And maybe to kind of flesh that out, if you could describe kind of a typical day, or if there's no such thing as a typical day, maybe a typical week or a typical month.
Sure. Every day is a little bit different, but yeah, so let's just talk about landscape architecture as a profession for a minute. It has architecture at the end, which is probably more familiar to most of you on the call or watching the recording. You probably have some sense of what architects do and what architecture is. Landscape architecture then is a form of architecture. It's a form of planning and design that works with the built and the natural environment. So like the spaces outside of the buildings, the spaces in between buildings, it's very much human oriented initially, but considers all environmental systems and ecologies that go into a kind of natural environment and then are constructed designs or spaces on top of it. So it gets to be a little bit more kind of broadly mixed with your environmental sciences. You all probably know what environmental science is. You maybe have studied some of that in school, but that is simply the study of the natural environment, animals and people and plants and how they live and operate and coexist. And so landscape architecture is actually working within that environment outside where things move and grow and evolve. And so our media is not as fixed as architecture. We're not working with solid materials that have a permanence that, maybe weather a little bit, but kind of have a permanence. We're working with some permanent materials, but then some that are tied into larger ecological systems like plants and soil and water. And so it's really a kind of combination of environmental design and architecture that come together to make landscape architecture.
Nice.
So I think the difference, having also studied architecture, I would say the difference in my mind is that as landscape architects, we have an opportunity, and sometimes I would even say an obligation, to think more broadly than a single project and a single site, because the work that we do extends into these other environmental systems, and can be tied more broadly to larger sites or larger infrastructure or larger frameworks that we're connecting to. So there is a strong environmental tie to what we do. And then there's also a strong cultural tie. We design spaces and environments that help teach and learn and tell stories about who we are and the place that you're standing. So some of the work that I do is memorial spaces and public space where there's a story to be told about a community or about a group of people or a place of significance. And so landscape architecture really becomes this blending of cultural design and environmental design that come together into all those spaces that you interact with that are outside of a building. So,
Nice.
you know, in high school, it's everything from the rest of the site of where your building sits, to maybe you have a community park, to maybe you've been to the sculpture garden at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. So maybe you've walked down the street and wondered why the spacing between the trees are what they are. I mean, that is, those are all things that landscape architects have touched and influenced and considered.
And when, or maybe how did you become aware that there was this profession called landscape architecture?
So when I was
and then once you became aware, how did you kind of decide that was what you wanted to do?
Well, when I was in high school, I had never heard of a landscape architect. In fact, I didn't have any connection to an architect. No one in my family or in kind of circles of family connections or friend connections. I didn't know any architects. I did have a kind of interest in both. My favorite subjects in high school were physics and art. Now, you could say that was because I had really great teachers in both, but there was something that I really connected with in both of those subjects. So going out of high school, I didn't know what I was to do with that kind of, you know, interest in two different subjects. I thought maybe engineering. So I started college undeclared. I took a bunch of pre-engineering calculus and pre-engineering physics and, you know, more of those, but I also took continued to take art classes. At that point I knew about architecture, but I just wasn't, you know, I didn't have enough experience. I didn't have a session like this to really know that I was ready to declare it a major. But as I went through the first year of school, I really realized that I could bring these two interests together in architecture. So my undergrad is in architecture. I went on and got a master's degree in architecture, went through the internship and took the exam, and I am licensed as an architect and continue to have that licensure, although I'm not practicing architecture at this time. When I was in my third year or junior year of college, I took a studio class in that architecture program that was really about designing a site and designing spaces outside. And that was my first introduction to the career or the profession of landscape architecture. And it was a pivotal moment where I started to think beyond a singular building, about the outside spaces that are designed, that are intentional. And there is an opportunity to be kind of creative in that exterior context outside of buildings. And so I went on and finished my architecture degree, but then went back to grad school for landscape architecture. And for some time, I thought I could be practicing in both architecture and landscape architecture. And in some ways, I still do that because I have that education and that experience in architecture. But my true love and what I am doing exclusively right now is practicing landscape architecture. And that for me, it's really because of this kind of blending of the environmental and the design of architecture together, and the ability to design and think about how our work connects to a larger framework and a larger context beyond a single project.
Mm-hmm. And remind me, was there a gap between architectural school and or licensure and going for landscape architecture? Was there a gap there? What did you do with the gap?
When I finished college, when I finished undergrad, I moved to Richmond. I've basically been in Richmond ever since. Moved to Richmond and worked for 3 years. And that's when I met Paul. Mm. We worked together in the same architecture firm. Worked for 3 years. And then I went back to grad school and did dual master's degrees. So combined them and did a Master of Architecture and a Master of Landscape Architecture. Did those together, graduated, and then moved back to Richmond, and have worked in firms ever since that have offered services in both, until about 5 years ago, and I stepped exclusively into practice of landscape architecture.
And in the practice of landscape architecture, what kind of growth is going on in the field? I don't mean that as a pun in terms of plants, by the way, but what kind of growth is going on in the field of landscape?
I should have expected that from you, though. Really, truly.
It only just now occurred to me, and I'm sorry that I suffered you that.
Yeah, landscape architecture is a growing profession. I think it is getting more visibility for a number of reasons. One, from an ecological standpoint, landscape architects are at the table with world leaders and really important people who are thinking about climate change and resilient built environments, how we as humans are going to sustain it and adapt to climate change. And so those environmental issues have design solutions, and having creative people at the table working with scientists who know the science, we're bringing the creative ideas to the table, is a really important future for the profession. So whether it's designing resilient landscapes in eastern shores of Virginia, where sea level is rising and becomes an important component of thinking about the future of living near Virginia Beach, near Newport News, or whether it's things having to do with stormwater management. The Chesapeake Bay Act came out 25 years ago now, but is still an important aspect of what we do. The Chesapeake Bay Act is a federal, I believe it's federal and state mandate that we're responsible for the stormwater, the rainwater that hits a particular site. We just can't let that flush into our river and stream systems with all its pollutants. So we have a responsibility to hold back that water and have it discharge at what would have been a natural pace, but also clean and improve it. And so that's part of the work that we do on every project. There's some component of stormwater management. Sometimes there are systems in place that have prepared for that, and other projects, it has to be an important component of what we do as designers. So those kind of things make the work we do relevant and important for the future of how we're going to live. We just completed a project down in the Northern Neck. It's a living shoreline project where there was an eroded degraded shoreline without any kind of habitat for the health of the Rappahannock. And we worked closely with a civil engineer and did some engineering improvements, but in doing that created a living shoreline, or a place where we gave opportunity for that habitat to come back and be a part of the pedestrian human experience. So part of what we do is really revealing and telling, explaining those ecologies, highlighting them, and really supporting the ecology itself. So as designers, we have an opportunity to improve those habitats. So sometimes our design work is not just for humans, it's for other living things, flora and fauna and animals. And so that's where there starts to be a lot of overlap with anyone who has interest in environmental science or biology. We work with specialists who study those, have study in those careers, but we as designers are the ones like thinking creatively about the design as a tool to recreate or improve habitat and environments, but also have a kind of interaction with humans in those spaces.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things I feel like I maybe begin to understand, and I certainly appreciate about landscape architects, is their sense of scale, right? And how different that is. You mentioned, for example, the architect is often concerned and kind of focused on the building, right? Is this discrete element? And then it belongs to the landscape architect to remember that exists within an ecological environment and an environment that has lots of different forms. And so when I think of the appreciation for scale that the landscape architect brings to a project, right? At one moment, that's dimension. The parcel of land and the things that are adjacent are larger than the building in almost all cases. But the other one is time. And so when I think of you mentioning that in that design, that insertion of the living shoreline at the site, if that's a coastal site and sea level continues to rise, then that element needs to be able to migrate somewhere. It needs to be able to kind of move and transform that site, and there needs to be
that boardwalk was actually
that.
designed to flood at times. And so it has some resiliency built into the design as well, to be able to accommodate the tides, the tidal changes in that area, as well as storm events.
Yeah, and how different those might be in another decade or another half decade or 100 years from now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so working as part of a team, I mean, there are very few, it's nice that this series is ACE, right? Because really between architects and the different types of architects and contractors and engineers, it really takes all those different people. But you also work on teams. You mentioned before you'd been in multidisciplinary firms. Your firm is multidisciplinary. Could you talk a little bit about, kind of resources and disciplines and what it's like to be a colleague, coordinating and collaborating with different people who have different sets of skills, maybe both in-house, but also out of house?
Yeah, I mean, collaboration is a really important part of what we do as landscape architects, and probably as architects in general, which actually made COVID and the pandemic challenging. We got through, we found ways to collaborate, but collaboration is such an important part of the design work that we do, and bringing together different partners and different specialists really give specificity and accuracy to the work that we do. At Water Street Studio, we are mostly landscape architects. We have a civil engineer, but we come to landscape architecture with backgrounds in architecture, like I do, but other professions and expertise in environmental science and horticultural expertise and anthropology. And so a kind of variety of backgrounds and expertise that impacts and gives perspective to the work that we do.
That's excellent. The so you're an architect, you're a landscape architect, but I also happen to know that you're a mother, you're a wife. I went looking for a couple of statistics, and generally speaking, in the United States, there's somewhere around 153,000 licensed architects. A little bit more than 23% of those are women. So that's about 35,000 women who are licensed architects. For landscape architects, there are less landscape architects. There are about 16,000 licensed landscape architects. A higher percentage of them are women, 34%, but that's only 5,500 landscape architects who are women. The combination, I couldn't even find that statistic. It's not readily available, but it stands to reason that the intersection there must be fairly few. So I'm curious, where do you feel like you're aware of those statistics, or how do they strike you, and what effect might your career have on kind of your lifestyle, your family? What kind of rules or boundaries do you feel you need to establish as you work your way through a career in addition to everything else you're doing?
Yeah, you're right. In many ways, women are a minority in this profession, and I think that's something that I've lived with and felt throughout my career. When I was in school, that was not the case. There were more women in school than men. Paul, I don't know if you remember that, or if that was
I do. And I remember even when I was teaching, and I mean, the studio, I had, as you said, I had more women than men in the studio.
Yep. But I think there is a significant drop off after school. Either women pursue other careers, or maybe more often, as they consider raising a family, they take a break from the career, or they step back altogether. I am married, have 3 kids. They're all girls, by the way. So I do like to think I'm being a role model for them in some ways. But I was committed to my career and my love of what I'm doing, and have managed to kind of sustain a career in landscape architecture while also having children. And it hasn't been easy. And it's, I think the thing I'm most grateful for is flexibility from the people I work with and work for. That allows me that flexibility to be able to do both, or try to do both. But I do think it's worth it on a personal level. I think I'm a better mom, better mother because I work, and I think I'm a better landscape architect because I have something that kind of forces me to take a break and forces that work-life balance. So I like to look at it that way, and find the positive in it.
Excellent. And you are absolutely an amazing role model on all counts. So thank you for that. But
I will say it's not uncommon to find myself like the only woman in a meeting or around a table. And the longer I get in my career, it's not uncommon that I might be leading that meeting. So I have had to, or I'm on a construction site and I'm the only woman. Although I am seeing more women contractors than I have in the past, so that's been nice to see. But I think it does, you do kind of build a comfort with it, or you kind of build a confidence that you need to be able to do the work, and maybe not think so much about gender, just stay focused on the work and the project and the collaboration.
Very good. Yeah, I was struck earlier when you were talking, I mean, from your own experience in high school, right? You mentioned physics and you mentioned art. And, I wonder if there would be any advice that you might offer in terms of someone, even if they are considering the profession of landscape architecture, what kind of classes might you recommend that they take? I mean, even even in high school, what kind of, is it more art? Is it more science? Is it a blend? What might you suggest?
Yeah, I think it's a blend. I mean, I think what we do, we are designers, first and foremost, but we're critical thinkers as well. So, those classes that you're taking in high school that help you think creatively or think critically about the world around you, are going to be beneficial. I went to grad school with students who had all kinds of different undergraduate degrees and had different paths, and all found themselves studying landscape architecture. And so there are many paths to this profession, and I would say there are probably many paths to lots of professions. But like I said, there is a mix of the creative mind, and then I think the kind of physical world, whether it's environmental or understanding of physics or structures and those kind of things that are a good mix of what we do as architects and landscape architects. So I don't know if that answered your question. I don't know that I just think there are lots of different ways you could get to the profession.
Yes.
I'm not sure what high schools offer in landscape architecture, or even an introduction to landscape architecture. Maybe it would come up through an art class, or maybe it would come up through a environmental science class, or maybe it would be introduced in some other ways.
Yes. Yes. Now, at some point, one does become a professional landscape architect, and I'm curious what you might be able to say about that, specifically in terms of salary range and pay. What does that start to look like, right? None of us, as much as we love our jobs and we talk about passion, very few of us are willing to work for free or able to work for free.
Right. I've been in the profession for a while, so I'm not even sure if I have my finger on what the starting salary would be. I will say this, landscape architects, and I think I can say this for architects as well, tend to make more money in larger cities. You tend to find concentrations of more firms and larger firms doing work in cities, in urban areas. It's not to say that the projects are necessarily all urban, but the firms are located in cities. And so there tends to be higher salaries in those more urban firms. I do think landscape architecture tracks a little bit less in salary than architecture does, but I don't have statistics to back that up. So I don't know that I could give a range of what a starting salary is right out of school without doing a little bit of work, legwork, and getting back to you on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not the one at our firm who's doing the hiring, so I should say that. I am focused on design, and I do a lot of the marketing and bringing in new work, and overseeing the design of that work and mentoring our staff.
Mm-hmm.
But we have other people in the office who are, in charge of the
negotiating the offer letters and things like that. Yeah. But is it also fair to generalize that you are hiring? There are opportunities for landscape
Absolutely.
architects?
In fact, we would love to have more landscape architects in Richmond. In particular, we are very busy right now. We're a tier 3 city, I think, if I have that right. And so we're large enough that we have some substantial impact in the city and the work that we do. We are doing some work in the city parks right now. We are starting some work with the city to tell the story and memorialize the sites of the slave trade that went through Richmond. And so there's a lot of good work to be done in Richmond, and there's a lot of exciting work that's happening, both culturally and environmentally, with the river right at our doorstep. it's a great place to be practicing landscape architecture.
And if none of us can do this, right? So it just ends up being a thought exercise. But if you could run into your younger self, what might you tell your younger self to either tell them about the profession or warn them about the profession? And if you had to do it all over again, would you, or if part of it might be different, what part might be different?
Well, absolutely, I would do it all over again. I love what I'm doing. I do think it wasn't a straight shot to what I'm doing now, but I do feel like I found my way there, and I truly love the work that I'm doing now. It can be hard work. I will say that, being in a design profession, there's a kind of iteration of design that takes time and takes a commitment. I think architects would say that as well. So I don't want to gloss over that. It does take it takes, as all creative work does, whether you're an artist or a graphic designer or something like that, it kind of generating those creative ideas take time and energy, but it's worth it. And the beautiful thing about what we do is that something is constructed of those designs, and in landscape architecture, those designs evolve because we're working with things that are living and growing and moving. And there's really an opportunity to improve the environment through the design work that we do. So that's pretty special with what we do as landscape architects.
Definitely. And I remember when you were speaking earlier in this conversation, that thought about how we're going to deal with issues related to resiliency and climate change, and the fact that perhaps more seats at the table are being given to landscape architects who really understand these issues at a different scale and with a different complexity, and how important that is, not as the only members on the team, but as members of the team, to have that understanding and approach understood.
Absolutely.
Very good. And yes, excellent. Well, I was also thinking back to kind of the relationship of landscape architect and architecture. I remember I was doing at a preschool. I was there for a career day talking about, this was architecture, not landscape architecture. That's a tough audience, by the way, 5 and 6-year-olds. But so I asked them, I said, what one of the things architects do are houses. So how would you describe a house? And I was really struck that the answer that one of the children offered was, it has a bedroom, it has a window, it has a red door, and it has a tree. And I don't know, I've had a hard time since then coming up with a better definition of a house. And I think that one of the things that child remembered to me was the fact that it's not just a house as an object, but it's also the relationship of that object to the landscape, right? Represented in this case by the tree. But yeah.
Absolutely.
Very good. Well, thank you, Jill. Thank you very much for this. By the way, we also have Joanna lurking behind the scenes, making the Zoom production work out. So thank you also to Joanna. But yeah, thank you, Jill. Really, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your
very welcome. This has been fun.
Good. Sharing your experiences, and keep up the great work. You certainly are an excellent role model. And so thanks to all of you for attending as well. And the next session will be live on Wednesday, the 19th of April at 12:30. That will be urban planning. That's the next in Ask an ACE. You can find more information or register for that at aiava.org/askanace. So again, with thanks to Jill Nolt, thank you very much.
See you soon, everyone.